It is at 10 o'clock. Is it 10 o'clock? At least mine was just a second.
Oh, there it is. Zoom panelist. You know why? Because I have to hit this like these notifications all coming this morning. It was very confusing.
So it's 6:30. I've got some echo there. Okay. Hang on here. There we go. Any echo now? Okay. So it's 6:30 p.m. and I will call this meeting to order. Any declaration of interest or general nature thereof, please declare it now. Any declarations? Seeing none, we'll go forward with number 3 on our agenda, which is delegations and presentations. So Public Sector Digest is on the call this evening and will be presenting to us. Oh, have I got some feedback? Nope. Okay. I wanted to preface this delegation with a couple of things. Public Sector Digest came into our lives about a year ago about that. The council had allocated some of the modernization funding that we were given by the provincial government towards this software. But I don't think that we really truly understood what we did when we made the decision to purchase that software and put it in the hands of our very capable staff. I'm very, very, very proud of the presentation that's about to happen, not to mention the asset management plan in its infancy that's being presented here this evening. I know that the senior management team has worked feverishly, quarterbacked by our treasurer, Kate Tyndall. There's a lot of information that has to go into this to give us the tools that we need in order to make excellent decisions on behalf of this municipality going forward for the future. It's a framework that we can work within going forward into the future that will, as we feed more and more information into it, will become more and more clear as to what we need to do in order to replace the infrastructure that we have and to gain more infrastructure as time goes on. But it's the key to the transparency of the process, and the old way versus the new way. I guess we had the best guess before, and that's not to criticize any staff member previously, but this new way of doing business in the township will put us forward in a way that I don't think any of us at this council table really understood when we allocated the funds to this. And Public Sector Digest has been here supporting our team here at the township and putting things forward in a way that I think is fairly easy to understand, even as a layman. I'm really excited about what this means for the township going forward in the future and how we'll be able to make better decisions and concrete decisions based on data versus best guess scenarios. So thank you again, Public Sector Digest, our guests that are here this evening, and we look forward to your delegation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor, for the kind comments. I agree with absolutely everything that you've said. And you do have very capable staff. So it's been an excellent project and journey, really. And I hope you can ignore the fire alarm that's happening in the background here. I hope it's not too loud. But I'll share my screen and we'll get started. And please let me know when you can actually see my screen. I will make sure it's. Does that look good, Kimberly? Excellent. Thank you. All righty. Well, thank you for having us, everyone. I'm very excited to be here indeed, to be presenting the 2020 Asset Management Plan for the Township of Leeds and Thousand Islands. It's about 100 or so page document that I want to summarize in the next 20 minutes. My name is May Abdu. I am an asset management consultant with PSD Citywide, and I was a project manager on this project. But we've also got Imad Alvi with us, who is the asset management specialist who really worked hand in hand with your staff during this project. And I really just want to give a quick shout out to Dave and to Kate for their level of commitment, and of course the other staff that we've worked with for their level of commitment and effort during this project to really provide you with a quality document. I do want to go over just some high level concepts within asset management before I jump into the numbers. When it comes to asset management, really the new way of explaining it is it's all about service management. So it's about what are these assets doing to provide this service for our municipality. We don't really concern ourselves anymore with how is that asset performing. We're more concerned with how is that asset's performing impact our level of service. So really the focus now is to understand what our level of service is and how we can continue to sustain it over the years. And we can do that within three major factors. One being the cost of your service, and by extension, the cost of maintaining, rehabilitating, and replacing your assets. The performance of that service, and of course, by extension, the performance and the condition of your assets. And then the risk that you're willing to tolerate to provide this service. And so we'll touch briefly on those three main factors in a little bit. But just to talk about the Ontario regulation here, with this asset management plan, the township is actually in compliance with the 2022 requirements. And you'll see with that little animation there, the reason it's in 2022 that we're presenting it is there was an extension by the province in 2021 for all of the deadlines. So it was previously due in 2021, but we're presenting it today. And that extension actually gives us more time to refine the data further so that it's an even more reliable AMP. Within this asset management plan that we're presenting today, the focus is really the core assets. So that's your roads, your structural bridges and culverts, your water, your wastewater, and your storm. Anything else like your non-core, your machinery equipment and your buildings, your land improvements, those are all considered non-core assets. And those are going to be the focus of the next iteration of the plan. Within this asset management plan, we've documented and developed your current levels of service. We've analyzed your inventory in terms of your assets, in terms of the attribute information available, the condition information available. We've documented and developed life cycle and risk and criticality models based on what it is that staff already do, plus recommendations from any recent studies that you've done, such as the 2020 road needs study. And we've also documented some of your growth and population forecasts. So that's all within this asset management plan today. Now, come 2024, you're expected to do the same thing, but for all of your core, your assets, including your non-core. And then by 2025, this is really the last flavor of the AMP, where you're defining your proposed or your desired levels of service. And that does require a bit of work, actually. Once you've defined your proposed levels of service for the next 10 years, you also need to document whether or not you can achieve and sustain them financially. And if you can't do so, what kind of risks are you willing to tolerate if you can't achieve those proposed levels of service? But that's for another day. I'll skip over this slide because it's really just a reiteration of what I just said. You are compliant to 2022 with the focus on the core assets. In terms of council responsibilities, this is something that's in the asset management policy that was adopted and approved way back in 2019, but I wanted to really highlight it here as well. That after 2025, all of your asset management plans are to be updated every 5 years. And then that after 25 as well, 2025, council shall conduct annual reviews of your asset management progress. Essentially just reviewing whether or not you've achieved your proposed levels of service. And if you haven't, what kind of activities or mitigation procedures do you need to put in place to be able to achieve them? And then finally, since this is a public policy or a public document, it needs to be accessible and posted on your municipal website for your residents to be able to access. Now, jumping into this asset management plan, please note that it is based on 2020 year end. It is based on the latest information that we had available. It's only a snapshot in time. So anything that's based off of this year, 2021, will not be incorporated in here. I'll touch briefly on the current state of your assets, what kind of process improvements are necessary to improve your decision-making process, and then what is your financial strategy look like? Now, in terms of your total replacement portfolio, you've got about $209 million worth of assets, with about 70% of that going towards your roads. So that's about $143 million just for your road network alone. And what that looks like for your per household is about $54,000. And that is just the value of owning or sharing those assets. So it's not the value of a service like your garbage disposal or your snow removal. That's just the value of owning and maintaining these assets. So it is quite the investment. In terms of the performance and the condition of these assets, as you'll see in the graph, we've broken it into a 5-point scale, all the way from very poor in the red to very green, or very good in the green. And you'll see that your overall portfolio is at 63%, or it's at a good rating, which is excellent, actually. The one important thing to note is, where is that condition information coming from? So it's important to understand what that source of your condition information is. And so that's what we have here in the table. And of course, if you go to the, sorry about that. Excuse me for 1 second. I think it's too loud to continue.
I'm more concerned whether you should be exiting your building, to be very honest.
To be honest, it happened this morning as well. So I think it's someone's playing around with it.
Oh dear.
Give me 1 second.
No problem. We can wait.
Thank you.
You're not allowed to go, Councillor Jameson. You have to sit tight. Until this is done, you're not free to go. Yeah, I hope it's not that serious either. I know it's difficult in high rises. Sometimes these things happen. We had a similar thing happen when it was so humid actually in Brockville in the building where I operate my business from. It went off twice in one day and it was just literally from the humidity in the elevator shaft. So, but firefighters came both times. Thank you very much. Yep.
We do have the firefighters here, so they're just disabling the alarm. So give me a few moments. I apologize
problem.
sincerely. Thank
Not
you.
a problem. And was this strategically placed, Fire Chief? Yeah, to get a ladder truck or something? Is that what you were thinking? Yeah. And a truck, yeah. No offense, Jeff, but Deputy Mayor, I'm gonna defer.
Madam Mayor, my apologies. Are we able to defer the presentation for another 5-10 minutes? I don't think this is going to end anytime soon.
That's absolutely fine. Just, okay, if you could send an email to our clerk when you're ready to proceed, we can possibly move forward with some other things on our agenda to move the agenda along, and that way we're not wasting anybody's time. But we understand these things happen, not to worry, we can wait patiently and we'll just keep moving along. So just send an email to our clerk and we will proceed from there. So
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. So Madam Treasurer, would you say that it would make more sense to defer the discussion in regards to asset management until after the whole thing is done? Okay. Perhaps we could move down with the will of the council at the table, move down to the Community and Business Services Report, SR 114-21, Transfer Payment Agreement. We can have a discussion on that. And the motion comes from Deputy Mayor Lackey and seconded by Council Durrell that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council authorize the Mayor and Clerk to enter into an agreement with the Province of Ontario as it relates to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Fund. Any discussion on that report that was brought to us by Community and Business Services? Any questions? Pretty clear, moving forward. Okay. Since there's no question on this particular report, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and the motion is carried. Next motion that's on the floor is moved by Councillor Jameson and seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the Committee of the Whole recommend that Council support the recommendation of the Economic Development Committee and notice be provided to the St. Lawrence Corridor Economic Development Commission that the membership will be renewed subject to a receipt of fully revised, legally vetted agreement that addresses all the items previously requested by Council, and that the amended membership agreement be subject to Council review and approval. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I'm pretty sure everybody around this table knows my my thoughts on this. I didn't want to renew it the last time. I wanted them gone. We don't have land to accommodate anything they want to do. And they really have done nothing for us. So I think it's a pure waste of time. Everybody's time, including yours. It's another thing on your plate that you don't need.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jameson.
I can't help but agree with Deputy Mayor. Basically, reading the memo that we want to send now with respect to what we are asking for, it's a carbon copy of what they were being asked for a year ago. And if I'm breaking this down correctly, what we're not seeing is anything in the way of measurable results, to the extent that there doesn't seem to be the metrics in place to get to that. So in light of looking at some very challenging things that are going on with respect to our own asset management plan and everything else, we really should be able to ask for and get a clear understanding of what is being done. It's not one of those situations where every 2 weeks they're going to announce a new business coming to town that they have actually found, but there has to be some measure of who's opening the envelope, who's going where, who's talking to whom. And even if it's confidential among the commission directors, that's fine too, because of the nature of that work. But it doesn't sound like you can go to a meeting and get a clear picture of exactly what is going on there. So in theory, the idea of a collective approach to attracting enterprise always makes sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me if I can't measure it independently of the people around the table, which is our responsibility as counselors. So perhaps for different reasons, I'm not interested in going forward, but at the same time, I appreciate the motion on the table is at least giving them another opportunity to respond. So I'm not going to, grill anybody on this. I just think we're not being well served by the structure.
Duly noted. Councillor Fody?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I'm not going to disagree with my fellow councillors. If I'm not mistaken, this was initiated in 2014. So for 6 years now, we've dumped, approximately 38,000 a year on this to show what? And that's the hanger right there. What are we getting for this money? You wouldn't do that with your own budget at home. But we're asked to do this with township budget. And that is a real problematic situation for me. Having said that, our own EDC committee has recommended what's before us here. I was not able to be at that last meeting because of holidays in our office. But does anyone that was there want to enlighten us? So where our own committee came from with this decision? I'm assuming that they see some light here, and Director of Planning, if you could answer that for me, I'd be pleased. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Venditti.
Thank you. Is the mic on? Yep. Thank you, through you. So the working group met a couple of times as well in advance of the EDC meeting. In reviewing the agreement that was provided, I think there was a general level of frustration that the items that council had set out in the resolution that was provided to the corridor last November, that they weren't addressed to the satisfaction of the committee, and that there were a few minor changes, but that there was no substantive changes based on what was asked for. So there was frustration in that, first of all, it was a redlined agreement, and secondly, that items hadn't been addressed in any detail. I think there was also some frustration that there hadn't been any communication back and forth prior to receiving the draft agreement. So in coming forward with the resolution that was brought forward from the EDC, they felt that it was important that the items be looked at holistically in terms of a whole new agreement, and that agreement, that council have the opportunity to review that agreement and approve it. So they wanted to leave the door open for the potential for council to have consideration of the matter.
Go ahead, follow up, Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the door is open for consideration to do the same thing we've been doing for 6 years previous. I would, from what I've seen with our own EDC committee, I think there's enough intelligence, enough background, enough focus. If we're going to give the money to anybody, give it to our own committee. I think we'd have something to show for it. I really do.
Councillor.
I'm going to leave it
Oh,
at
sorry.
that. Thank you.
Councillor, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Is there any sense that it's just a communications problem? That they just don't advertise the stuff they do that is positive. I mean, I'm hearing the flails are beating the dead horse here pretty heavily. And I agree with what I've heard, and I would be in favor of what I've heard. Just want to give somebody a chance if in fact there's just something they need to tweak in their own organization.
Thank you. I guess I will answer that question because I'm the one who goes to these corridor meetings. So I think what it comes down to is that you have a mix of individuals on this committee who are business owners, along with a bunch of mayors who are trying to support a regional approach to economic development, which is a very worthy cause in general. The difficulty with the communication side of things, which is what your question was, Councillor Oki, is that there is a number of highly sensitive discussions that are going on about businesses looking at purchasing properties in other communities, not necessarily ours. But it was identified that our community would be supporting the regional approach in that we would be potentially housing some of those workers. The people would be going there to work in these businesses that would not necessarily be located in our municipality, but they would need to live and grow their family in a community that was supportive. So that was our contribution to a certain degree. The difficulty with those meetings, to be quite blunt, is that the structure has been loose for a number of years. We've requested it, and I'll be quite honest, I wish we had our appointee, Bo Passy, there about 2 years ago. He's been a great asset on that committee in that he has been pushing them to be more decisive, but also to get some things done. I think it comes down to a real dissociation with taxpayer dollars. And I'm not being critical of the other mayors there. They all have different horses running in that race than we do, depending on who you're talking to. The difficulty is that it is taxpayer dollars, and we're responsible for those dollars and allocating them and getting value for our dollar for those. And right now, has there been some small wins that have happened over the last 6 years? Yes. Have they been directly influenced by, or have they influenced our communities within our municipality specifically? That's a harder target to pinpoint. So the $40,000, if you look at it in basis of our overall budget, is it a huge amount of money? No. Is it still a significant amount of money? Yes. And, I think when I say they have dissociated it themselves with the municipal budgeting process, the agreement was shoved under my nose, so to speak, to say, here, sign it. And they were perplexed as to why I wouldn't. And because it's not my decision to make, it's not my money to commit to. This was, and I'll be honest, the rest of the mayors signed it because it wasn't in their mind a huge material change to the original agreement. So they didn't feel that they needed to go back to their councils to have that review. So because we were the ones that instigated the changes, because we were the ones that asked for further clarity and more transparency when it came to the measurables and the metrics expected of the corridor as a whole, both of the employees and what they would come out. They tried to make the agreement better, but they fell short, in my opinion. The difficulty that I have is that going into budgeting, and as we go through this asset management plan tonight, you're going to see that we're going to have to make some decisions, and the budgeting process is really important. Does it mean that we don't want to support economic development? Absolutely not. But there are different ways we can support it. But the motion that's on the floor tonight is to give them a small window to rectify it, to come back for further consideration to extend the agreement. So the decision tonight is not to join the we've already provided our notice. We essentially are no longer members as of November 19th. And this motion is asking them to renewed subject to receipt of a fully revised legally vetted agreement that addresses all the items previously requested by council. I don't have that motion in front of me right the second. Oh, Marnie does. So Marnie, can you speak to the specifics just so that the council has that?
Certainly. Through you, at the meeting last November, council's motion was that council provide 1-year written notice to terminate involvement in the corridor, that the mayor and business industrial representative on the board continue to work with the corridor board within the 1-year period to update the existing membership agreement to include details regarding governance structure of the corridor, cost of membership, expansion of the mandate of the corridor, performance metrics, and notification period for exit. And that the EDC, through their working group, continue to work with the township industrial representative and the mayor to advance work on an updated membership agreement and recommendation regarding continuation of membership in the corridor for council review and consideration prior to the expiry of the 1-year term of notice.
So having repeated those terms that we had put forward to the corridor, of those terms, which ones have been done?
Addressed the
Yes.
cost of the membership, there was no change to that. That just reverts back to the original agreement. In terms of the expansion of the mandate, what was being asked was that it align in some ways with the priorities of the Economic Development Committee that council previously approved. In doing that, they added agribusiness, but there was no tourism or hospitality included. As well, there were no performance metrics included or discussion regarding performance measures in the agreement. And the notification period for exit was revised from 1 year to 6 months.
So with that information in front of you, that should provide some further clarity. I'll recognize Councillor Jameson and then Deputy Mayor Lackey.
Okay, as we discuss this, we of course remember that the county has an economic development office, which takes in many more municipalities and is being funded quite handsomely at this stage. And this, one can say, well, you need a mechanic to fix your car and you need somebody else to fix your computer. But the challenge is, unless it very specifically talks about the performance metrics and what is actually happening, how are we to make the case to residents that this is working? Especially when we're already quite involved with, financially anyway, with the economic development office in the county, and is it performing in a way that would satisfy our local residents? So it can't be a standalone discussion. We've got a lot of money going into various things to do with economic development, and we're doing it here in our own township with respect to tourism and hospitality and the things that actually, get the cash register going in this community. So if we're going to move ahead, I can see supporting this motion if for only one reason: to support our economic development committee, who put the time in, but done the heavy lifting, to give them that sort of face-saving exercise that allows us to say, okay, we'll give them another month. But if we're looking at the same requirements a year later, and really the planning director said nothing's changed, where do we go from here in the context of already investing a lot of money ourselves in those speculative things we call economic development?
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I would, and through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I think I'd take the earliest out that we could, if it's 6 months.
We're done as of November 19th.
Okay, well,
So-
I think we should be out and we should not entertain. As Councillor Jameson said, if we're going to put money somewhere, we'll put it into our own economic development committee. Economic development means a lot of things to a lot of different people. It's hard to pinpoint it's hard to put your thumb on what, what goes where and where should we go. But I think our committee has the wherewithal and withal to guide us going forward.
Okay, Counselor Maybe, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. So does this mean that our representative that's on the EDC would be completed or finished at this point? Would his term be terminated?
I believe that would be the case unless he was appointed through another municipality, which you can appoint industry representatives.
Secondary, I have a couple other questions. If I
Go
could,
ahead.
please. Has this committee done anything for us? And is there anything that you're aware of that may be coming down to us?
Without breaking confidentiality, there is something
Okay.
quite large in the works, not in our
But-
particular municipality, but would be a huge win. It's imminent from what I've been told, but
Mhm.
that is also, there's a lot of working pieces when you talk about
Yep.
private business. So anything can happen. So like I said, there's been a number of small wins over time, but generally those wins of those businesses that have located or expanded they've been in and around the Augusta, Edwardsburg Cardinal, Brockville area, and
Mhm.
those, and I think Prescott in the area of Prescott as well. So Elizabethtown Kitley is just on the cusp of Brockville. They obviously get maybe more of the residents that are working directly in Brockville. We're that much further out, further away. So depending on how well paying the jobs are, can dictate whether or not people can actually physically move out this far and afford to drive back and forth, or depending on where their spouse might be working. So, it's certainly not because we wouldn't benefit in if you look at the ring, it gets
Mhm.
further out, right? And we're less likely to be affected, but
To that point, have we got $200,000 worth of something coming to us? Because over 6 years, that's what it basically boils down to, roughly. And secondly, well, one other question was, does the county have anything coming to us actively? Is it working on anything that's economic development that, since we touched on both those, and I know you can't really talk about specifics, but generality,
no, actually, it's a very good question. So economic development at the county level is more about business and retention, business BR&E, as they call it, business retention and expansion. And Ann Weir and her crew at the counties, they have a lot of different municipalities to serve as well. They're currently working on a new destination marketing organization, which has posed some challenges because of the overlap with our existing DMO that exists through the Gananoque Thousand Islands Chamber. So there's a lot of people with a lot of fingers in the pie. Maybe I'll ask Ms. Goodman to be more specific, because I know that in our own communities in conjunction with Gananoque, we've been working specifically through the RED grant to expand and help our businesses. And I know that there's other stuff going on at the county, but I'll let Kim speak a little bit more.
Certainly, and through you, Madam Chair, just to add to that, I know when we entered the pandemic, Ann Weir and her team have been leading. We started off with monthly calls. We've now gone to every 2 months, but it's a way to stay connected with employment services such as Keys, Thousand Islands Community Development Corporations, and whatnot. So I believe Ann was here about 6 months ago, roughly, maybe more, and did a presentation on some of the findings of the surveys that they've been doing. And very much like we've had McKenna Modeler working with us, not only with the RED program, but as our digital squad member for the Digital Main Street program. And Weir and her team have also been championing that for municipalities that haven't been able to administer programs like that on their own.
But I think the term that was used with another person that I was speaking to today about economic development, sometimes it's like bagging smoke. And And that's the difficulty with economic development, because there's a lot of work and a lot of glad handling that needs to go on to make some of these different, the different reasons that somebody would come to a community. And certainly not that it's not important, but it's how it's structured and whether it's persistent and consistent. And if, just to tie this all back in, it's about measurables. And this has been the issue from the get-go. Not to go further down the rabbit hole, but I'm going to read the motion again so that everybody understands clearly what we're voting on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Graham. You gotta put your mic on. There you go.
Thank you. I just want to bring to our attention that in the report under analysis, Economic Development Committee recommends to council that membership be continued, and basically it gives a time frame here until November 18th. So basically understanding everything that council has said tonight, the Economic Development Committee has suggested that we give them that very limited and strict, it seems to me, time frame. So I just wanted to make sure that we took that into consideration before a vote. That is our Economic Development Committee, and somehow they must have spent some time on that. So I would suggest we need to think about their recommendation in the overall, not discounting anything that I've heard here, if that makes sense. Thank you.
That's actually saves me rereading the motion, because that's exactly the point that I was going to make by rereading it. This is to support giving them one last kick at the can to come back. It doesn't mean that we have to even continue it. If they came back and we still decided not to move forward, that would still be within our purview to do. So
It says it would lapse.
correct.
So that's
But if we decided to stay in, we would have to vote on whether or not we would stay in.
by what time frame? I'm reading a hard number here of November 18th. And
So they would have to come back to us with something
so that
before
would
the
be-
December meeting.
Would we be willing to deal with that or not? I mean, we could tonight just say, nope, we're done. Or we could say, okay, you put something together. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Well, to Councillor Gorell's point, would it not be, your worship, a budget item then? So in the context of our discussion, our budget discussions, we can put it in the context of what we need to do here, what we might want to do there. Maybe we can find out what the Economic Development Office is doing in the county and try to see where that 40,000 fits or doesn't fit, or maybe where it would be reallocated or not based on our larger picture. Because the one other point I wanted to make is I'm not sure if we're entirely clear what our strategy is with respect to economic development. So it would be nice to have a robust discussion in the context of developing our business plan. But I agree with Councillor Gorell.
I'll let Ms. Venditti speak to that, and then I'm going to call the question.
Thank you. Through you, just to clarify, last year, council did approve 3 strategic priorities that the Economic Development Committee had identified for the township. I may get it wrong from you. I need to jump in. One was tourism, agriculture, and housing.
Yep.
And hospitality. Yeah. So those were the strategic priorities that the EDC identified.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
I'm aware of that and I thank you. I'm not suggesting it isn't all there, but I think once again, we're not done our strategic plan and presumably that gets translated into that. And right now we're kind of in that
Limbo.
Yeah, we're in the interregnum where we don't have a strategic plan. We've got to pass the AMP and all these things will come together. But I take your point. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm still going to read the motion because I'm going to call the question. Moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the committee of the whole recommend that council support the recommendation of the Economic Development Committee and notice be provided to the St. Lawrence Corridor Economic Development Commission that the membership be renewed subject to receipt of fully revised, legally vetted agreement that addresses all the items previously requested by council, and that the amended membership agreement will be subject to council review and approval. So the only way this moves forward is if they meet all the conditions, and we still have to vote on it at that time. Go ahead, Councillor Grow. I'll have the last word.
Well, I don't presume to have the last word. Over the past year or more, it has become evident to me the pillars that were just described represent this community better than bricks and mortar. We have the RTO 09 doing things. Kim could touch more on that. We've been there many times. We are tourism, we are agriculture, and we don't seem to be overly connected to Johnstown Port, other than I know shipping goes down there, but that's for them to deal with, not this council. I'm not sure that the economic, that the amendments that are being asked for are, if we say, yeah, you come and meet our amendments, I'm not sure it meets what's been put forth by this council. I don't think it meets anyway. We're kind of at cross purposes. So whereas at one time I supported being with this group, I have to admit my mind has changed, and I'm of a mind that we are many things, but we're not bricks and mortar. And as you've pointed out, as each counselor has pointed out, it's been a lot of money, and I haven't seen anything. I've seen more from the RTO. I've seen more from the National Post media, that sort of thing. Our tourism, we're more connected in Gananoque in that sense than we are elsewhere. So that's my two bits. The way I read this, I think I would have to say no, because we're giving them an opportunity to support something that we have just discussed that doesn't really hit home for us. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna let Deputy Mayor, and then I'm definitely calling the question because we have our Public Sector Digest people back on the line, so.
Okay, I'll be very quick. If I'm a business owner, if I'm somebody that wants to start up a business, you're not gonna tell me like we can't do anything. You go, if you're opening a business, you go where the business will thrive. And that's quite simple. People that are going to start a business are going to do their research and go where they need to go. And that's it.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify. 1, 2, 3, 3. And all those opposed? 4. And the motion is defeated. So as of now, we will no longer be a member of the Corridor Commission based on tonight's vote. Okay, seeing that we have our Public Sector Digest on hand, we will get back to that, and hopefully there we
Thank you,
go.
Madam Mayor.
Glad to see you back and still in your apartment.
Still alive, yeah. Thank
Wonderful.
you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your patience and your understanding. I apologize for that. Perfect. Let me share my screen here. Okay, where were we? All righty. I trust you can see my screen, full screen.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All righty. So as we were discussing in terms of the performance or the condition of your assets, on an overall, the condition of your portfolio is about 63% or good. But what's important to note is what that source of condition information is. So if you'll see the example of the storm sewers, it shows that it's 100% in very good, but where is that information coming from? And so within the actual asset management plan, we go into much more detail within each category, each section, but just as an overview here, you'll see for the roads and the bridges, we've got external consultants that have assessed these assets. So you've got the 2020 road needs study, the 2019 OSIMs or bridge inspections. And so those are what we assume are the most reliable and objective examinations of your condition of your assets. But then as you look through all of the other assets, minus a few assets from the fleet, everything else is age-based. And what that means is we took the age of the assets and the typical estimated useful life, and we calculated what is the remaining service life. And that was just a proxy of our condition. And as you know, age-based condition is not always the best determinant of the performance of your assets. You could have assets that far outlive the service life, but they are still operating well and they're performing well. And vice versa, you can have assets that are just newly built or newly bought, but because of their usage or their location, whatever factor there is, they are deteriorating much faster than they should be. So that's really why it's important that you have good condition information guiding your capital forecasts. Now, I want to point out a good example here, which is your buildings and your facilities. Even though in this asset management plan, it's all age-based, staff are currently conducting and finalizing building condition assessments on all their buildings, or at least on all their critical buildings, to be included in the next iteration of the plan. The reason I want to point that out is I do have an example here for you as it relates to fire hall number 4. So I'm sure the fire chief will like this example. Basing it off of the age, it was in a very poor state, versus based on the condition, the assessed condition out of this 2021 building condition assessment, it's actually been assessed at a good. And so you can see how would that actually impact when that asset needs to be replaced, what kind of preventative maintenance or rehabilitation needs to be done on that fire hall based on that condition. And you can see that the capital forecast would be much different if it was in very poor than if it was in good. And I do want to point out, just when it comes to the buildings here, they utilize something called the Facility Condition Index. And with that actual rating, the lower the percentage, the better the asset is. So it's that's why you see the 6% actually indicates a good versus the 60% is a very poor. It is almost the opposite of that condition graph I just showed you a few moments ago. But so that's really the value of having good condition information, because that's going to allow you to apply the right activity to the right asset at the right time. And so within this project, we worked with staff to document and to build life cycle strategies for all of their core linear assets. And this example right here is for your roads, for your asphalt urban roads to be specific. And so we looked at the current strategies that staff actually employ on their roads and incorporated some of the recommendations that came out of that 2020 road needs study. Now you'll see in this graph, you've got the condition on the vertical on the y-axis, and you've got the time in years in the x-axis or the horizontal. And you'll see with that first deterioration curve, this is the curve if you let your assets or if you let these roads run to failure, essentially meaning you only replace them when they come to end of life. And what that looks like on an annual basis is about $3.2 million on an annual basis, just so that they can fail at end of life. Now, if you compare that to the deterioration curve that's all zigzags, that is actually the life cycle deterioration curve. And that's basically if we incorporated the right activities, whether it's crack sealing, microsurfacing, mill and pave, depending on staff expertise, what they think is best at this time, or the recommendations coming out of the road needs study. Applying those activities will enable us to extend the life of your assets. So instead of it failing at that 40 years, you'll see that it optimizes the life all the way until about 100 years. And doing this activity actually costs about $1.5 million on an annual basis. So really there's about a cost savings of about $1.7 million. Now, of course, this is not going to be for every single road, but this is just showing that by being proactive and by building preventative maintenance activities into your strategy, you were able to optimize and extend the life of your assets and lower your annual requirements. And so that $1.5 million annual requirements for your road is what we incorporated into the financial strategy that I'll point out in a few more slides. So once we define that life cycle strategy, it's important to understand what assets to apply it to, which assets to prioritize. And that's really where we worked with staff to prioritize and to weight different metrics depending on their criticality. So for your fire and emergency services and your assets, we rated those and ranked those a lot higher than other assets because of how important they are, critical services. And we utilize data sources from your GIS, from your OSIMs, your bridge inspections, from your road needs study to build this risk matrix based on your probability and your consequence of failure. Doing that, we get this beautiful risk matrix here, which essentially allows staff to prioritize which assets to conduct lifecycle activities against first. It allows staff to coordinate their projects better. So any assets that you see in that top right, in that orange or red, are high probability and high consequence of failure assets. So they are critical, high risk assets. Whereas anything in the bottom left is low risk. It is low probability of failure and low consequence. So this is really all about you're targeting the right assets at the right time, and you're doing the right thing to them. And by doing all of this, incorporating it into the asset management database, into your assets, the average annual capital requirement is about $4 million. So this is on average what it costs just to maintain your current level of service. So you'll see in the graph, it's about a 50-year long-term forecast with each asset category specific to a color. And within the actual asset management plan, this is done in much more detail to each category. So you're able to see this based on each asset segment. But taking that $4 million capital requirement, subtracting the capital funding that's available of about 2.2 million, you get this annual capital deficit of about $1.8 million. So this capital deficit, just to keep in mind, is only concerned with current existing assets. So it does not factor in growth. It does not factor in future opportunities. It is just the deficit that you have to bridge your current existing portfolio. One other thing to note as well, that when it comes to the capital funding available, it does not incorporate any one-time grants or transfers. It only accounts for consistent and sustainable revenue sources. And that's what's necessary to be in compliance with the Ontario regulation. But of course, those one-time grants and transfers are going to be an important source of revenue for you. They're just not going to be incorporated into these asset management plans. In terms of what that looks like from a recommendations perspective for your tax-funded assets, to fully fund them with that $1.8 million deficit, you need about a 1.1% tax change over the next 15 years to fully fund your tax-funded assets. For your water rate-funded assets, it's about 1.9% rate change over 20 years. And then for your sanitary assets, it's about 0.7% over the next 5 years. And again, as I mentioned, this does not incorporate growth. This is just to maintain your current existing infrastructure. And finally, just to wrap up with a few slides here, in terms of the most important recommendations to continue to sustain and improve your asset management program, it's important to continuously refine your asset inventory data. It's important to centralize it so that all of your assets are within the same database. The same risk modeling and lifecycle strategies are being applied to these assets. So you have a comprehensive and holistic view of how much it actually it costs to maintain your assets. It's also important to refine your data because it's going to impact your capital forecasts. And of course, as staff continue to operationalize their software and their asset management, they'll be able to use it to supplement their budgeting, to use it as a foundation for their capital forecast and their capital expenditures. The next recommendation is to continue to refine your condition information, because as we saw, condition information directly feeds into the life cycle strategies and the capital forecasting as well. So it's important, whether it's internally through staff or external consultants, that condition information is frequently updated. And then finally, to continue to evaluate and track your current levels of service so that come 2025, you have an idea of the trend or the pattern that emerges and what proposed level of service you're able to provide. And then in terms of next steps, as you prepare for your 2024 and 2025 requirements, consider some sort of public engagement strategy to communicate and get feedback from your residents in terms of what levels of service expectations they have and what they're willing to actually pay for. And finally, to understand that this asset management plan and this program as a whole is a living document that is continuously being updated and refined. And as we say, garbage in is only going to be garbage out. So it's important to continually feed it good, reliable data so that the capital forecasts that come out of it are also just as accurate and reliable. And that's about it for my presentation. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there any questions for the presenter in regards to clarity? Keep in mind that the asset management plan, as the big document that we're about to get into, is going to be discussed under the next motion. But if there's any clarity required by Citywide, our guests this evening, I'm happy to put you up on the stand here. Councillor Jameson.
I did chat with the treasurer, but I'm still a little unclear, and Kate's always very clear, but it's me not understanding. In the context of these numbers with respect to the long term in terms of percentages of potential increases in taxes and so on, what I couldn't quite nail down was where the impacts of inflation and perhaps the larger thing that's going to affect everything is the changing climate, the changing conditions of climate. Your Worship, how is that factored in, or is it factored in, or is this kind of a flatlined budget concept?
It's a great
It's
question.
two questions, but anyway, if I can have an answer to that I understand, I really appreciate it.
Ms. Abdu, would you like to speak to that, or?
Absolutely. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Jameson. So inflation is actually not incorporated into the asset management plan. So I hope that's also what Kate had mentioned to you. In terms of the climate change adaptation, that is incorporated within each asset category from a qualitative perspective, but it is not factored in from the financial strategy perspective. That would be something considered growth or future opportunity, which is not incorporated in this asset management plan. Thank you.
Maybe we'll get further down that rabbit hole in the next motion that's coming forward. Are there any other questions or points of clarity from our presenters this evening? Okay, it doesn't seem that we have any additional questions. Thank you again for your presentation. It was very clear, concise, and I know the big document that we're about to dive into is a bit different. But again, just thanking you for your time and your expertise working with our truly dedicated senior management team to come forward. They've worked very, very hard on this, and I know it sounds strange, but I am very excited about it. I know when I read the document as a whole, I know there's lots of great information there, and that's what makes me weird and wonderful. So again, thank you. And my understanding is that you will be sort of staying at bay. If we do have any questions, we can reach out to you. We'll send an email if we need anything further. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, would everybody like a quick break to refresh themselves? So I'll call a quick recess for about 8 minutes. So 9 minutes, back at 7:40. Thank you. Yeah, Sam's Club. Okay, it is 7:40, so we'll reconvene. And we're going to move our way back up the staff reports. So we've already done the transfer payment agreement to the province of Ontario. We're going to go to finance report SR-113-21, update to strategic asset management policy. So the motion at hand reads, moved by Councillor Oki, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve bylaw number 21-055 to update the strategic asset management policy. So questions on the report, we'll ask the treasurer to answer any specifics. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Do we have to deal with SR 11221 first?
Well, it was brought to my attention that the rest of the policy framework shows that we should have policy strategy plan. That's the order we should be doing things in. So technically the strategy should come before the plan. That was why it was suggested, but the treasurer might be able to speak to that one way or the other. Go ahead.
Through your worship. So the policy was actually passed in 2019 as part of the same regulation that we just talked about for the updated plan. But this is just, I wanted to clean it up a bit and add a couple sections and.
Right.
So it's just to speak back to what will be the asset management plan
Right.
going forward. Are there any further questions for the treasurer? Go ahead, Councillor Gorell.
I apologize because I find this very complex, and I apologize in advance if I ramble. But my memory goes back to the official plan that this township struggled with. And this isn't a lot different in many respects, this strategy here. And we had a room full of citizens here regarding that official plan. There were two councillors here at that time. I don't think any of the current staff, maybe one, was available. So I think we need to look at this carefully. The words shall and will became major, in my mind, stumbling blocks in that official plan, because those words put real power into statements. So when I read shall and will in here, I get a little nervous because I think of the way that official plan raised so many hackles. It was staggering, and it passed by 4-3. Very controversial. So before we just casually look at this, I would think that we should devote some time to it. So a question would be, what's the hurry? Does it have to be done now? No, it does not, would be my opinion. We could leave this until we have more time to look at it rather than the 4 days I've had to look at it. We could incorporate it in a special council meeting. I just have a certain uneasiness. I know it's all perfectly well-intentioned. So was that official plan. I suppose I could come up with dozens of questions here, but I could dominate this entire evening. Levels of service, definitionally, I read it on paper, but really we could break that down to be careful about every single item. We could go on and on about levels of service. We have things in here. It's a catch-all basin. And is that what we really want? A catch-all basin? I mean, we have everything in here from, let's see here. Let me get to it here. Guiding principles as an example. The guiding principles, this reads like an official plan. The official plan was supposed to be from the government, the provincial government, guiding principles. Well, let's get rid of shall and will and put in may and could. As an example, we have, it's this catch-all basin that just makes me somewhat uneasy. Risk-based, okay, we could talk about that for quite some time. Risk-based, is that financial risk? We have borrowing available, we have this available, as opposed to fires and whatnot. We have, let's see, we have thrown in here, of course, what's positive now is climate change stuff. Again, it's so embracing. I don't know, it loses its, it seems to me in many respects, it loses its power. Thank you.
Excuse me. Does anybody have any other questions for the treasurer? Or maybe the treasurer can, sorry.
Sorry, just through you, once again, this is an update from 2019, and most of this policy is the same policy that council passed in 2019. The only changes I made were to add a table of contents, add some definitions, tried to explain a little bit better, a couple sections on asset management framework. So tried to tie it in a little bit better with the plan that's being presented tonight. But in the context of the regulations that this policy is coming from, the intent of the policy itself, the guiding principles, none of that has changed. So this is what was already passed by council. If council wishes to defer it and discuss it further, that's fine. But the 2019 policy is still in place, which still has most of this information in it. So just so you're aware.
So it wouldn't be a radical change, only that, like you said, you've changed some definitions and added the table of contents and a couple of additional. So
I tried to make it easier to follow and easier for residents or whoever's looking at it to understand as it relates to the plan. So like these charts that are in here are new. But most of the content in terms of the guiding principles and other things are all out of the regulations. Like they're not unique to us. So when I do policies, I look at lots of other municipal policies, and you'll find actually most of the wording is almost exactly the same because we've all copied from the regulation. So, I mean,
so really, and just for further clarification, this is based on regulation by the Municipal Act?
it's based on the asset management regulation and I think it's jobs for prosperity, and it's quoted at the end of the policy. Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act 2015 and the Asset Management Planning Regulation. So,
Okay. So I'm going to recognize Councillor Olkey, and then Councillor Jameson, did you have your hand up? Okay, and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a general thought I've been discussing with some people. If these are regulation based and it's an order of the province, what really is there for us to discuss? I mean, we've just been told we're having a police services board, whether we want one or not. We could vote on it, but we're going to have it no matter what. Okay, this sounds relatively similar. I mean, council's busy, you're busy. A little stressed by this, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Councillor Jameson.
Okay, so we know we have a requirement before us, but it is always worth our time with respect to Councillor Gorell's point of view. And the official plan was such a Donnybrook for those of us that spent the time sitting in the gallery trying to figure out what the heck was going on, that we come to this moment based on a regulatory requirement, which a great deal of that official plan also was required of us to do, even the wording of things. And some of the pushback at that time, and I won't spend too much time on history, was an individual arguing against regulations that already existed in the Planning Act, which was just grandstanding. So putting that aside, I think the concern about shall and will is always reasonable in looking at these things. And we see, the wording like, which has not changed, particularly a climate change will be considered. Well, it will be considered, but it doesn't necessarily mean we must. I think there's a lot of those, what I would call weasel words in some of these regulations that do give us a little room to move here and there when we need to. But at the same time, I agree completely with the province's mandate to get these asset management plans in place, because, over the years, we brought properties we don't know what to do with, and we've done all kinds of things that make no sense whatsoever. So I take your point, and I respect that point of view very much. And I think as this council and the next council gets into this living document, as we're calling our asset management plan, we will be able to have a robust debate around the wills and the shalls. I'm pretty confident we will anyway. Thank you.
So, okay. Go ahead, Counselor. Maybe I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Perhaps our CAO, who may have a little bit more knowledge on verbiage and how that should be played out with these words, whether he has some insight for us.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Maybe. Shall and will are imperative, so we have to do it. I take exception to weasel words because I've made a living for 30 years on those. Where you say may or could or should, it leaves room for interpretation, and it promotes good litigation, because it all of a sudden creates uncertainty or vagueness, or it takes the teeth out of a provision. So my understanding is that our policy is drafted in accordance with the regulation. If we were ever, for some reason, asked to produce our policy, we can point to the regulation and say, here's how we comply with it. If we try to water it down and leave the door open and alter the wording, you can be asking for trouble.
Okay, Counselor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Well, first and foremost, it's already been said, excuse me, by you yourself, Your Worship, that the staff that has compiled this, my hat's off to all of you. I think Councillor Grell touched on the fact that the copious amount of information here, I actually surprised myself when I got through to the end before the weekend on 4 days. I'm glad I didn't have a lot planned, but nonetheless, it's compelling information if that's the type of read you want, and that is the type of read I want if I'm going to make a decision on behalf of taxpayers. This is exactly what I want to see. But Councillor Grell touched on something that I've been saying for a few months, and that we need a special meeting on this alone. We can't just sit here in one meeting and discuss this for 20 minutes and yay or nay what this policy represents. We need to digest it. If it's paragraph by paragraph, which could be a little tedious, but this is too important not to. That's my main pitch here. This is exactly what encompasses our whole township financially and for the will of the people that live here. So if we're gonna work with this, we need to fully understand it best we can.
Counselor Foti, not to minimize your point, where the motion that's on the floor is in regards to the policy, not the plan. So I take your point, and when we get to the asset management plan, we can discuss further opportunity to digest it and have further training on that. And I don't necessarily disagree with you that it's a lot of information, and having another forum to discuss it further might be warranted. This is our first kick at the can because, as the presenter said, that this is the first iteration and there's a lot of information coming forward. However, the motion that's on the floor is in regards to the policy, which, as the treasurer has stated, already exists in place. And really the changes that had come forward are for simplification, identifying some of the words and defining those things. So the policy is to make it easier for the general taxpayer, the changes that were made to said policy, to make it easier for them to understand. So it was the treasurer's intent, based on what she had just said, to make it simpler for the general public to take that information into consideration. And while I appreciate Councillor Grell's point in regards to the shalls and wills, as the CAO has indicated, a lot of these policy, the regulations come forward from the province. So rather than reinventing the wheel here, I personally, I don't usually do this, but I trust the treasurer's judgment to put forward a report to us that, not that it can't be questioned, but I do believe that my review of the policy when I read it was that it's not really that different from the policy that is in existence. So the motion that's on the floor is to approve the update to the strategic asset management policy. So questions in regards to that, I'll entertain. And if not, then we're going to call the question. Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
But I think we have a little confusion, and I know I've had trouble with this. The policy that's on the table right now is not the plan.
Correct.
The plan will evolve, but the
Correct.
policy must be in place in order for us to execute the building of the plan. So this is where it took me a little while, and I'm not sure if I've got it clear in my own mind yet. We need this policy in order to begin building the plan. This is the bare bones, however many, for 100 and some odd pages. But we need the policy in place. So I think that's the point you're making, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Correct.
And just to say, some of the best weasel words I've ever used were written by very fine lawyers that I respect. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments in regards to the motion that's on the floor in regards to the strategic asset management policy approval of said policy? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Noted, and the motion is carried. Okay, next motion that's on the floor is moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve the updated 2020 asset management plan. So I'll ask the treasurer to come forward to the podium, because I know that she's going to be on this along with the director of operations. I don't know if you guys want to stand side by each, because I'm sure it'll be a bounce back and forth. Not that I'm looking to steal any of their thunder. I've had a chance to speak with the staff over time in regards to this, but please keep in mind that this is a totally dynamic plan that constantly changes based on the information that is compiled and put into the plan. This is the first time we're seeing it. As Councillor Foti said, there's a lot of information here. Please keep in mind the hours, weeks, months that the staff have got to this point. And there is a number of, what's the word I'm looking for? A number of asset management type reviews that are coming down the pipe imminently, like the condition assessment, which the Director of Operations building condition assessment is going to probably speak to. So that will change this plan again and again and again. And all of that data that feeds in will make it better and better and better. So I'm going to, do you want to ask a question before they go ahead?
Are they going to make a presentation?
You're presenting this, or you just want to ask? Okay, we'll get right into the questions then. So go ahead, Councillor Guerrero.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. And once again, the complexity of this will certainly require more than this evening to get through it. One question, quick one. The word sustainable, revenue from sustainable sources. What are those sustainable sources that we reviewed? Taxes and what else? Because it doesn't specifically say, it says sustainable revenue sources.
Okay, are you on a specific page or?
I could be, but I'm not. It's there many times.
Okay, through your worship. So sustainable revenue, like she was talking in the presentation, would be revenue we can count on. So not one-time funding grants. So we're talking about taxes, borrowing, if that's an option, or grants like federal gas tax, which we tend to receive year after year.
Understood. Let's look at casino revenues. Casino revenues were due to taper off in some years. I don't know the timetable. So if we were looking at a 15-year plan here, sustainable revenue would certainly shift balances in that same time. That's just more a comment, not a question. So a question would be, are we being what would be the harm in, I don't see any time frame that makes this imminent. In other words, we could defer this until March, acceptance of this plan. Keeping the framework there, we don't have to approve this before Christmas time, because the budget process may inform a lot of what we do. So a question would be, number one, can it be deferred till March or some future date? And B, if we were to approve this plan, does that obligate us to a 1.1% tax increase? Or is that a recommendation that we could implement at any time, not necessarily this year? Thank you.
Through your worship. So you can defer the plan, but just to keep in mind, again, the plan is as a point in time. So it's actually based on 2020 year-end data. So we've updated this data even since the time that this has been written. So like by deferring it and then approving it later, which is fine, is take as much time as you need, but it's actually becoming more and more out of date with it in touch of reality of what we're actually using for the budget even. So this plan is a point in time to give us a guidance on where we're at with asset management, but in terms of the actual data we're using to build the budget and the financing strategies, that's all going to come through budget. Like you're not approving any financial plan in like to the extent that we need to raise taxes or that we're going to borrow money or we're going to do whatever we're going to do, that's going to come through a budget process, not like based on you approving this plan.
I'll take you at your word on that.
Well, everything has to come back to you through budget. So, and even like I said, like we have some better information now, even than what we've got in this plan, in the software already captured that Dave's using to budget with.
Okay. And yeah, that would be, I suppose I did read through that it's been core assets at this time. And, you know, that was a struggle for me going through this, trust me. So core assets only, there's lots of non-core assets that we haven't yet touched on in this plan, which, correct? Would that alter that 1.1%? Would it shift that needle significantly? Thank you.
Through your worship. So the non-core assets, they're still in the plan. We've still tried to capture them in our asset inventory. The regulation doesn't require us to do the same level of work with those ones, but we will have to have that done. I think it's next year, but 24. So, and as we, again, continue to try to refine the data and come up with better condition and risk information, we continue to try to meet those regulatory requirements as we go. But yeah, this plan was intended to meet those requirements, which were specifically at this time for the core assets, but there is other work being done on all the other assets as well, like the building condition assessments.
Yeah. If I may, I really don't want to dominate this microphone. Level of service. When I read that word level of service, I picture going to the front counter with a permit or wanting a permit. Level of service in that case is, yeah, Mr. Grell got his permit in a timely fashion. But when we get into level of service of all these breaking down everything, and I can sort of understand to some degree, mainly the hard covered roads. I have a pretty good handle on that theory that if we see them, so the level of service there is providing a good road. No one ever complained to me about having a hard surfaced road. They do complain, however, about gravel roads, and the level of service there is a little vague to me. The level of service in fire service is a little bit vague to me. And these are great words, you know, level of service defined, redefined. How much does that influence that 1.1%, you know, that shortfall of 1.9 million? Those levels of service are pretty significant. And yet we haven't, it says we're going to define them. We haven't yet got there. Is that fair? Or am I missing a point here? Thank you.
Through your worship. So I'm going to try and answer this and then Dave's going to also comment, but the levels of service are actually defined for the core assets. Some of them are defined in the actual reg that there's certain ones we have to actually measure that are in the regulation. So as a municipality with all the services that we do provide, I mean, there's assets behind all of them, whether it's a facility that we have a community building or a fire hall or whatever, right? Everything's based on asset. That's what we need to provide services for the most part. So what the plan is attempting to do is, and all the work we're doing on asset management is attempting to look at what are council's priorities, whether that's through the strategic plan or otherwise. How do those line up, and trying to align, like, what are those priorities? What are the services that council wants to provide? Do we have the infrastructure to provide those services? If we don't, and there's a gap, then either how do we finance that or how do we then adjust those levels of service? And there's a lot more work to be done on this, obviously, like this, again, first real draft, I would say. I mean, it's gonna, and we need approval to meet the reg, but this is really a draft because we know that there's still a lot of work to do on the levels of service and making sure we can align that with the strategic plan, which isn't even passed yet, but then also down to the asset level.
So you touched on something there that, and again, don't let me dominate this microphone if anybody wants to step in. So we have this number of we're shortfalling, and we all know that we're shortfalled for years and years and years, shortfalls in funding infrastructure. Yet the report nailed the number, said we're short by 1.9 million. So this is frozen in time with that level of service frozen. Is that fair to say? In other words, it's frozen as of what, 2020, I believe. So that level of service right across the board, the number of snowplows we have, the number of graders we have, that's frozen, and that's the level of service. And at that point, we are 1.9 million in deficit. Is that where these, I'm reading it, 1.8 million annually, funding gap. But it would take nothing. And this is what concerns me coming into the budget process. Some of those budget items are large, and it would just it would appear to me to throw this out of kilter, because we have some capital investments coming up. This is 1.1% into the capital infrastructure, not from the operating budget into capital, if I understand it correctly. So I do appreciate the work. I'm just still nervous about when we talk about 1.1 increase in taxes, when, where, and how does that have to start? And how accurate is 1.8 million deficit?
I'll recognize Dave,
Thank
so
you.
he can answer that, and then I'll recognize Councillor Jameson.
So we're talking about a few different things with that comment. The infrastructure deficit gap that we have right now is condition based. You're looking at our infrastructure at a point in time. We're saying that we have a life expectancy of a road of 50 years, and we're 2/3 of the way down that road right now. That gives you a rating on that road. By introducing the level of service, we're now saying that you're willing to assume some of the risk. So we're willing to let the road network as a whole, or individual roads, go to a certain point. And we're comfortable with that. We know that if we maintain our roads network at a 60, and we do this for every individual category, that we're willing to assume a level of risk for each one of these categories. And now we've really refined, what our infrastructure gap is with that. What we've done so far is we've taken all these different pillars of assets, and we've just said, at this point in time, this is in this condition. At this point in time, that's in that condition. In order to get it to a certain level that we're comfortable with, it's going to cost us X. We haven't established that level of service at this time. So we're saying we want to make everything good right now, which is what everybody should shoot for. We've set technical levels of service of, say, 70 for an overall condition of 70 for our roads right now. But we need to dive into that further, because the public has the level of service that they think we should be maintaining it at, and they don't look at it the same way we do. They want to have smooth roads. They want to have bridges that they can drive over. They want to have clean drinking water. Those are levels of service as well. And we have an obligation to provide those services. But it's how many of these roads are we okay with not being smooth? Obviously, water, we can't have water not potable. So that one's off the table. That's a level of service that we have to maintain. That's how they marry together.
Okay, Councillor Jameson, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, just to the extent that I'm trying to understand this, like everybody else, that when we call these, this is a guiding document. The word guide is in there. It's a changeable living document, but it actually provides us with information we didn't have before. And when we talk about level of service, so I was going to say an asset management plan should be called a planning framework. It should not be called a plan, because a plan is something, say, this is the plan, we're going to take it out, we're going to implement it. But as a planning framework, it's a guide, I think, if I'm getting this right, that will allow us then to budget, create business plans. And then when we say we're going to build the Taj Mahal, And then somebody says, yeah, but your bridge is falling down. You got a bridge that's about to fall down. Maybe we better do that this year instead of building Taj Mahal. So for the first time, really, we have a document that is a planning document, that is a guiding document. This is how I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we can draw from and ensure the priorities. Now, where the director of operations, says citizens want smooth roads, they actually want flowers in the villages. Those are the things I hear about more than I do roads. So, I mean, it starts to become down how we manage what should be, what could be, and what must be. And it's not just needs and wants anymore. We've got a third layer there, what must be done. Otherwise, we're in trouble. So I'm comfortable with where we're going on it. I just think it's coming to understand there's asset planning strategies, asset planning management plans, asset management policies. We're kind of mired in the words right now. But I think it's a framework from which we can budget, and no one's going to raise the taxes until we all raise our hands and say, let's raise that tax or let's not. And I think we're not passing something that's binding us to something. It's providing us with the guidance that we've needed for years. So that's where I'm at on this.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. When I went through all this presentation on the weekend, as I said earlier, I was impressed. The amount of information that we need is here. All the information we need is here. And as you had stated, it's going to keep morphing into dropping old information, picking up new, be it a replacement of a bridge, what have you. Councillor Grell touched on this, and this is where I question, and that's why I would like to have several hours devoted to this so we can all understand where we're coming from and going to. And that is, this township was amalgamated in early 2000. This is the first time this has ever come about. And we're come up with, $1.8 million short. So we're basically telling the taxpayers it's your fault. We're $1.8 million short right now for what's happened the last 21 years in this township. That'll be the problem I have going forward with a budget, is to put that onus on every taxpayer in this township today for what's happened for the last 20 or 21 years. Keep in mind that we're working off MPAC assessments from 2016. They won't even be implemented in this conversation I had with the director of finance last week until next year. So we won't see the results of that until 23. Is that correct? So we're going to be 8 years out before our financial draw or intake is changed to want to balance this, in my mind. Having said that, I don't want to wait to move forward with this document. And it goes back to Councillor Grell, like, is it 1.1%? And I understand what Councillor Jameson's comments about, we won't pass a budget until we do just that, until we pass a budget. But this information here, as great as it is, it's a culmination of what's taken place in our township in a lifetime, virtually, as far as road creations and so on, bring it up to today. But to haul off and just make a financial commitment on 20 or 21 years worth of information and implement it tomorrow on money that's based on impact that's already 5 years old and is going to be 8 before we see any significant change. This is where I have a problem. I'm going to have a real problem passing a budget that's much more different than that 1.1%. I'll leave it at that for now, but I would really like to get us together, all of us, senior management team, all of council, so that we can spend X number of hours someday going through all of this so we all know where we're coming from. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Jameson, and then go ahead.
Okay, and I don't disagree with what I'm hearing Councillor Foti say. I'm looking at you now. But it's the budget process. This is an assessment. And, it's kind of scary to see it because we haven't seen it. we've known in the back of our minds for however long we've been here that perhaps things weren't being managed all that well in terms of what we knew was working and not working. Now somebody's drawn a kind of an audit, like a financial audit, and said, at this point in time, here's what it might cost us, what it might cost us. So we're not committing by passing this basic draft framework, committing ourselves to a budget increase or decrease. We're not committing ourselves to anything except having the guide from which we will have very detailed discussions when our budget comes down. So this does not commit us to anything unless I'm not getting this right. So I think we just have to remain calm and bite the bullet
Okay.
and get on with it.
So I'll recognize you in 2 seconds. I just want to point out a couple of things in the document that was provided to us. So on page 23 of the key insights and analysis of tax funded assets, that's where who's got me. Sorry, we'll just wait until we got him muted. Okay, he's got you. She's got you muted. You're good. Page number 23. So to reach sustainability, tax revenues need to be increased by 1.1% annually for the next 15 years to eliminate annual deficits. That was based on the snapshot in time. So the document does not say we will increase taxes by 1.1%. I think what's getting confused, and I appreciate Councillor Jameson's point to the word plan. The word plan makes it sound like this is cast in stone, but because just going back to the whole living document part, we haven't got our facility condition assessment done for our buildings yet. And that's on page 20. Sorry to jump around. So page 20, you can see that the condition assessment for the road network, the bridges and culverts, those are all done 100% because we've got those studies done, and that is locked down. Since this document has been completed and produced to go out, since then, I believe the building condition assessment is just being finalized, correct, Director? Like, I don't know if you've got the full report back yet, but it's close.
We've not received the full version of the draft complete yet.
Okay. So, so that's going to go into the under buildings and facilities. They'll be 100% assessed, correct? Once we get that full report. Okay. So that's going to change what our infrastructure deficit is at that point in time on that particular, or it could identify where we're doing better than what we thought we were. Because the information that was presented to us in previous lifetimes was a best guess scenario rather than using actual data. And, the data that was available was used as best they could, but this is much more strategic because of the way that Public Sector Digest and their programming works. So the plan framework, I'm going to use what Councillor Jameson said, is just to provide us more information such that we can get better potential draft budgets that come to us. So this document is not saying that we are increasing taxes by any percent. They're saying based on the information that we have now, it would be recommended that you would need to increase it by 1.1, but we don't have all the information right now anyways. So the plan itself is putting in front of us what data needs to be drilled down and received and put into the system such that we can get a complete picture. But the real tough part, and even what I struggle with, and I'm sure the staff struggle with, it's never going to be complete because it's always going to be evolving, because a truck will break down and will not meet its life expectancy based on the capital, based on the fleet management plan that's as part of this asset management. But we're basing it on data that we have based on maintenance, based on the year it was bought and how many miles are on it and how many oil changes have been done on it. But that's how far down this plan can go, right down to oil changes being put into the system to best guess on how long a truck will last, for example. So the plan that's been put forward in front of us today is to give us, the core ones have been done. And that's done 100% as based on page 20 of the assessed condition. Once the storm sewer system, which I know that Aqua's been in and to meet with staff, they have data. They're going to now be,
It's the sanitary system.
the sanitary system. I apologize. So the sanitary system, they will be providing additional data to the staff, which will feed into this plan, which will change the numbers again. So it's the fact that it's data collection. It's data collection to further inform, but it's done in a framework that should be easier for us to read, to feed into the budget document that will come forward, because it'll help staff prioritize rather than us yelling and screaming saying such and such a road needs to be done right now. And that's not to say that that doesn't factor in, but it's not the only reason that we do something. So Councillor Jameson, and then I'll go back to, I apologize. Councillor Oki, my apologies.
Thank you, Your Worship. And that 2 seconds you gave yourself, I think perhaps drained everything from my head, but I'll try.
Sorry.
I'll try. As long as 2 seconds on record thing. I think what you're doing is plan here is a verb and not a noun, and that's confusing people. To me, what you've offered us is this framework ahead, but that shows action. It doesn't show a concrete fact yet. The most stark thing you showed as an example was the roads deficit of 1.8 million annually. Does that accumulate? That's a shortfall, an annual shortfall of 1.8 million on roads. Does that accumulate? And on my calculator, that comes up to a $36 million deficit cumulative on roads, which perhaps is fixable, perhaps not. There's a framework issue for you.
Sorry, trying to think about this one.
Through your worship, I think when they're looking at the annual deficit, they basically took, and I forget, I think it's 40 or 50 years, they looked at what would we need to replace, or how much would we need to spend on the roads for that 40 or 50 years? And then for each year, how much have we been investing in roads up, so based on our current numbers, how much we've been afforded to invest? And then what's the average that we need to put in? What are we actually putting in? And that's the difference, would be the number you quoted.
That would also affect level of service. That one.
Can you speak into your microphone? Sorry.
Thank you.
Just so that everybody can hear.
Yes. That 1.8 would also go to your level of service. That 1.8 million we haven't spent on roads takes the roads from 99% to perhaps 60%.
Yeah, it does affect, but it could potentially impact the level of service. And so to your point too, it is almost like presenting the financial statements in a sense, because it's like at a point in time, here's where we're at with asset management. It's like the financial statements. I mean, by the time I present them to you, it's like May, and we're already 5 months into the next year. It's not really a great picture of the financial health of the township that's timely, because it takes us that long to put them together, get them audited, and actually bring them. So it kind of like is assessment. This is an assessment of our asset management program, our asset management plan at a point in time, and it's already changed by the time we actually get it here, and it continues to change.
Councillor, is that everything, Councillor Oki?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Jameson?
So my favorite part of this big document is
Page number?
page number, 98, the financial strategy. And this is all, I understand this completely, all the roads problems, because I went to music school, so I understand it. So going over to the financial strategy on page 98, it says, for an asset management plan to be effective, and I really want to see the word framework, to be effective and meaningful, it must be integrated with financial planning and long-term budgeting. Now, to Councillor Fode's point, that's where the heavy lifting comes. That's where the granular discussion comes. And all this thing is constantly being updated, and things like the chief coming in and said, well, one of the fire trucks broke down. That's the constantly updating this thing so you know what's going on. But for council, with obviously the guidance of staff, has to look at this asset management planning framework in the context of the financial planning and long-term budgeting, not in the context of what we're seeing on this page at this moment, because we may have to change something that we think is, my goodness, this is going to kill us. We could have something that's even worse in 3 weeks that requires us to shift our emphasis. So I recommend you take a look at this section. I got all my little notes. I'm going to ask the treasurer a million questions, and I'm sure she's just thrilled at the opportunity about this section. So thank you.
I'll go to Dave.
Sorry,
Dr.
You
Halliday.
had me stumped because $1.81 million seemed like a lot of a deficit for our road network. The funding gap of $1.81 million is actually for all of our assets.
Yeah.
That's why I was confused. It's like, that's a lot of money that I was unaware of. So yeah, that's all assets combined. Yeah.
Still a lot of money.
It's,
Is a lot of money.
yep. Sorry, Counselor Maybe, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So a very good report, and I did read through the whole thing. A couple late nights got me there. The infrastructure is required for the services, no matter how you look at it. We've got to maintain our service. That's what our residents expect from us. So this document does point us down a better road, no pun intended, Dave, to get us there over a smoother road and make it more palatable. The one thing is that I have struggled with also is the percentages. And I realize it's 1.1%. So that's this year, same 1.1 next year, but it doesn't incrementally keep growing, does it? And that's the one thing I was kind of struggling with a little bit. And I realized that this is a moving target also of what our infrastructure may require in servicing, or even, as we know, a fire truck can cost $600,000, and that doesn't take much to start taking that plan in a whole different vein. So we need to know, how does that percentage that you got 1.1 is going to be 1.2, or is it going to be 15 in 15 years? Like and that's hard to forecast, and I understand that.
Through your worship. So I think based on the plan that PSD helped us put it together here, it's 1.1, and I forget the period of time, but it would be 1.1 each year over that period, 15 years.
Not cumulative, so not 2.2, not.
It would be
That's what I was hoping it wasn't. So
But-
yes,
each year it would increase the one.
a small fraction, perhaps. Like increase a
So
small
it'd be a
fraction.
1.1% increase for 2022 and a 1.1% increase for 2023 to get us to that 37.6 in one of the examples there.
And also just reiterate what the presenter said was that this only takes into account the current assets that we have. So if we were to buy an additional backhoe, or we were to buy another fire truck to add to the fleet, that would change our infrastructure requirements. So
It's like a ladder truck. Sorry.
were you done with your questions for now? Councillor Gorell, go ahead.
Excuse me. So that really, for me, the nut of it has become between Councillor Jameson and what's been said here. The critical part of this plan for me is section 7, the financial strategy. So when I read the motion, we are being asked to approve the updated asset management plan, and we're circling around this financial strategy. So I'm having a hard time reconciling the fact that, I'd like to approve 98% of it, but the financial strategy in section 7 is still open for debate to me. But I fully appreciate the work's gone in here for defining asset management, the plan. But what if I say yes to this? What am, regarding that financial plan strategy of section 7, what am I agreeing to? Does that make sense? Thank you.
Through your worship, really nothing, honestly. Well, so the financial strategy part of this is, again, based on the data that was used in this plan, based at 2020, to give you, like, to present an example of how we might deal with it, right? But we already know that there's updated data that we're using now for budgeting. We already know that there's some assets that aren't even in here because they're net new assets. They're not in our inventory yet. They're outside of the, like, this is to provide options and, you know, some sort of kind of framework from within which we could talk about how we might achieve some better financial sustainability. But this, if you approve this plan, like, I'm not taking any of this and using it in the budget. I'm taking the actual numbers that SMT is giving me for capital. I'm going to look at our reserve fund balances and I'm going to come forward with a proposed budget based on that information.
So sorry, if I may. So as we move into the next few months of budget planning, this financial strategy is really in the background.
Sorry, yes.
Section 7.
Well, and I guess to expand though, I mean, for right now, for budget purposes, I will be just trying to get through this budget. I mean, the idea between the financial strategy, like, then really what we need to do is I need to figure out what capital do we need to spend over the next 5, 10, 15 years? What are the revenues that we can estimate conservatively? Where are those gaps? Like, there's a whole ton of work, which is kind of what this is alluding to. But I mean, the numbers in here have already changed. So this financial strategy, to the extent that when I bring the budget, won't necessarily look like this.
All right. So we're not, again, I use the word, we're not obligated. It's if we took a snapshot in time, that would put us there. But that snapshot is well behind us. And we don't, by accepting this and saying, yes, I vote for it, this is still just background, more information. It could be accept a report of information. It could be a report of that nature. We're not forming a bylaw or anything of that. We're just moving forward into budgeting. I got that right. Thank you so much.
I'm going to recognize the CAO because he's jumped up.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you.
Something bit him.
So through the budgetary process, as Kate has been explaining, it's up to council what they want to approve. The plan gives us additional information where we're being told, based on the snapshot of the condition of the assets that we had at the time of writing, we need a 1.1 increase in taxes to fund the capital deficit. It's entirely up to council whether or not they want to pass that, if that's what we're recommending at budget time. But at least now, you know, if you go for a 0% budget, at least you know what the implication is, because we should have been going for a 1.1 increase according to the condition that we had at this time, which will change based on information that we got. So more information is always a good thing, right? But ultimately, the final decision rests with council. So you're not committing yourself to anything. The financial strategy lists out various scenarios or ways that we could fund things, not you have to do it this way. Okay.
So therefore, once again, moving into the budget process, we may be presented with 2 or 3 scenarios and options to deal with. Is that fair to say? Or is this going to be the number one option and priority?
You want a good, better, best scenario, or?
I mean, again, I know I'm getting ahead of my skis here a little bit, but
Yeah, I don't even know exactly. So, through your worship, I'm not even into the budget so far as to yet to know how
Okay.
good or bad it might look. So, but I will definitely be providing options if I can to
Yeah.
try to make sure we think of all possible ways to deal with the budget.
And finally, one last question. Are we, if we again deferred this until we're further into the budget process, does it matter? I mean, we have the information. It's great. Do we need to, is there a timeline besides the provincial timeline, which is actually next year because they bumped it ahead, right? Am I
That's
right in
okay.
saying? So we have this now, this information. We can use it, but we're not obligated at this moment to hit the gavel and say approved. Is that fair to say?
Through your worship, that, yeah, there's no real urgency around approving the document itself, other than to meet the regulation, other than the fact, I guess, just we wouldn't want to have to go back and try to, Like, if you're not happy with exactly what's in here, again, it's a snapshot in time. So it's not like we want to go backwards and try to fix the 2020 year end data because we've actually already moved past that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're already beyond what's in here now based on even the work we've done since this. So like, if you were to say, well, I don't really like that, I want to go back and change it. Well, we might already even be beyond that, beyond that now, because we continue to work on it.
If we did absolutely nothing this evening on this, does that put you in a bad position? Does that put the planning in a bad position? Right? Or does it just move along? Does it just move along anyway? Sorry.
So, sorry, just one clarification here. If we kick this down the road to March, we're going to be working on the data behind the scenes. We're not going to have a whole new one of these. Okay. So just to set expectations, if you want to defer to March and hold a special council meeting where we can answer in greater detail any questions that you have in the document, that's up to council. We're happy to do that, of course, as a staff. But we're not going to be able to keep generating iteration and iteration of this document. There's a ton of work that goes into this. And so we probably wouldn't have anything that looks any really substantially different. We could probably have an update on the infrastructure deficit and stuff, but you wouldn't be getting a whole new document.
I'm going to recognize Councillor Maybe. He's been waiting. So Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. So basically, there are other possibilities of getting money from other ways, like the other governments, because they've mandated this policy that we do this and that we find out what our deficit is. So they may, in the future, may have some pockets that they want to deposit into ours to help us out if it was all possible. But also, a lot of this money is going to sit in reserve funds that we're going to collect until we need it to actually do that particular work in some cases. So it's kind of a 50-50 split in my mind, that as we collect this money, it's going to sit in reserve fund for a certain length of time before it's actually required. Correct?
So thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Your Worship. So the stick on all of this from the province is, if we don't have an asset management plan in place, we aren't going to be able to apply for funding for anything. The other thing is that the asset management plan is based on sustainable funding. So the special pennies from heaven that drop intermittently from various governments aren't anything that we can count on. So what this plan is based on is stuff that we actually can see coming down the pipe, as Director Tyndall had alluded to earlier: tax revenue, gas tax, those things that are recurring and are consistent. Right? We can't count on, the province dropping a special fund for asset management on top of whatever they've already done.
Just as a specific example, the funding that we received for the playground structure, for example, that would have been, if we had this asset management plan in place a year and a bit ago or whatever, the additional funding that we got from that grant, we would have been putting taxes up assuming that grant wouldn't have materialized. So it would further allow us to allocate funds somewhere else, because that money, as you call them, pennies from heaven, it's not pennies from heaven. It's based on work and dedication from the staff members identifying these opportunities to get the additional funding. But I guess the question is, if we don't pass the plan this evening, what changes between now and then? And I think the CIO kind of nailed it in that the data itself may change, the amounts might change, but the theory behind the constant updating of the data so that we can make better decisions at budget time, still the ultimate decision lies with us. So the approval of the plan this evening that's been put forward to council is really about the theory behind our staff working with not just the senior management, but the other levels of staff that are on the ground, boots on the ground. And I think in another example that Dave had given me was Trish, who is our facilities manager, who I know that she did the assessment on the playground structures along with James Tuck. But that, when something breaks down in one of the facilities, it's being noted. And if we fix it, it would help add to the lifespan of that asset. But it's been noted, whereas before none of that data was being captured. So the more that it evolves and the culture changes within the organization, this plan will get more and more and more refined, but the framework is here. And I think actually Councillor Jameson really hit it on the head. It's a framework. It's not, and you did as well. It's a verb. It's not a noun. It's not a stagnant, this is it type thing. Go ahead, Treasurer.
Sorry, through your worship, just to clarify to you, thinking in what Councillor Grell's question is, some of the funding applications will ask that we tie back to our asset management plan. So if council doesn't approve it, it could impact our ability to apply for funding and be able to say we have an updated 2020 asset management plan and then hopefully tie to this plan to say that it's supporting why we're applying for funding. And that is one thing the government will look for. We do have a 2014 asset management plan. If anybody wants it, I can send you a copy, but it is a little outdated.
So the last asset management plan that we've approved at this council table is 2014. So, okay. Are there further questions for the treasurer or the director of operations?
Let's do it.
Any further questions? Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a last minute thought here. On the upcoming budget process, are the departments going to refer to this as the way that they're going to want to purchase or trade off equipment? Is that going to have a factor at all? Or is there going to be a same old from the fire department, the roads department when it comes to equipment? Or is this going to factor in everything from here on in?
Through your worship, for the assets that are in our citywide program, we have used the program itself to generate the budget. So it does have an impact on how we're doing our budgeting already. We're using that information that feeds into the asset management plan to generate our budgets this year.
Okay, well, let me be a little more precise. I'm assuming that building assessment's not going to score well for Springfield House. So if we were looking to spend money on bricks and mortar, as has been said before, a real good way to quite callously take care of bricks and mortar would be to get rid of Springfield House. That's not my personal goal. I'm just being very blunt here. So if we're looking at, let's put it simply into trucks then. If you're looking at trading trucks, are you going to take the one that's most costly to keep on the road and maintained? Or are you going to take the oldest truck that has the least value and trade that off? And then, of course, it comes through this asset management plan as a newer truck, lifting up the value of the fleet. You get rid of that old stagnant one that's broke down 3 or 4 months of the year. I'm just trying to ask, is this how the departments are going to look at budget coming in? Or is this all going to filter down from the way we currently do budget and it'll just end up over here inadvertently?
Through your worship, currently the majority of our assets are straight line deterioration. So we have an expected life expectancy in the program for them.
Mm-hmm.
Our plan with what we're doing with our roads right now, we do have risk-based and condition rating where that is helping us make our decisions, smarter decisions. And we create those risk profiles for all of our assets, and level of service is part of all of that as well, where it will help guide us to make the smart decisions. You don't necessarily get rid of the old truck because they typically don't break down as often as the new ones. You get rid of the ones that, like you said, are constantly breaking down. It's your downtime. The perfect example for trucks is it's your downtime. You look at the amount of repairs you have to put in versus the life expectancy for it. And that's how you judge which ones should be replaced.
Any further questions for the directors? Seeing none, I will call I'll read the motion again. Moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Grell, that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the updated 2020 asset management plan. All those in favor of the motion at hand? All those opposed? And the motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you again to the staff for bringing us into the 21st century and taking us, because when you talk about straight line depreciation, when that last comment that was made, that is definitely the old way of doing things. So this will hopefully put us in a much better financial position over the long term. So the next motion that's on the floor is under, oh, sorry. Other business, unfinished business. I apologize. Is there any unfinished business that anybody wants to have discussed? Go ahead, Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship. To put you on the spot, I had asked at a previous meeting, were you able to get an answer on the County Road 3 regrind? Is that partially finished or finished? Thank you.
I have not got a clear answer on that. I have asked, I haven't heard back from the direct. Oh, sorry. I guess our director has got an answer before I did, which is great.
I don't need to get a hold of the county. What they've done on County Road 3 is a microsurface, similar to what we've done on some of our roads. That's a preservation technique, which we've included in our asset management plan as one of our techniques, and that's the finished product.
Go ahead, Councillor Fody.
There was a motion. So how do you offset that? There was a motion that from this point on, the county would redo a road. They would pave the shoulder. So they coming in next spring to pave those shoulders?
But I think that the motion was that when they rebuild a road, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a preservation. So they're extending the life of the existing assets so that they don't have to replace it.
So they rebuilt the road from here out to Union. And that's why the shoulders got paved,
Correct.
essentially.
So this is the county's way of getting out of the obligation to pave shoulders. That's the way I would read this.
I think it's the county's way of extending the life of the existing assets they have so that they can invest money in other assets that require further investment sooner.
That could be, but I know our mayor brought this to county. It was approved, voted on by county's council. I would like to have our mayor bring this up at county again, because I saw our county in action today, just north of Black Rapids, patching rough spots on County Road 3 that desperately needed them. And kudos to the staff for doing that. But when we pass a motion, or I should say when county's council passes a motion, when a road gets to be redone and it must include or will include paved shoulders, I expect them to follow through on that. Thank you.
I will get an answer verbatim on that. Thank you, Director Halliday. Councillor Jameson.
Sure, if it's unfinished business, but the lights are out in Sealy's Bay.
Oh,
And
dear.
I mean, they're out. So I'm just wanting to know if there's any progress on the repair of the lights
Director?
on Main Street.
On Main Street.
Thank you. Through your worship. The lights have been ordered. It was a 5-week delivery for the lights to arrive. We're 3 weeks into the 5 weeks. We're hoping within the next couple of weeks that we'll have them, and we'll be able to get the lights back on in Sealy's Bay.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Go ahead, Councillor Fody.
Thank you. And this will be it. With the operations director, could you enlighten us on the current state of the Rockport boat ramp and or dock?
Stealing all my thunder. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through
It's
your
okay.
worship. We had ordered a variable message board to put up on site. We'd anticipated the start to be the week of October the 12th. We're having some issues with the fabricator, with the hardware coming in. So the contractor today notified us that they were request a start date of November the 28th with completion. I want to say it was mid.
November 28th
Sorry,
or
no,
October?
October.
Oh dear. Okay.
No, that's my mistake. Let me just confirm. October 25th with completion on November the 26th. So we have put the variable message board up on site in Rockport, notifying everybody that passes by. I've reached out to a couple of the marinas as well to let them know.
Good to know those specific dates. Maybe we can put it on our website as well as our Facebook, social media posts so that people can have fair warning that way as well. Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Okay, and we'll move forward with other business. And there's a motion on the floor moved by Councillor Foti, seconded by Councillor Maybe. Whereas the province of Ontario announced the 2020 budget that for the 2021 calendar year, business education tax BET reductions would be implemented to support businesses as they recover from COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas in an effort to ensure municipalities would not be negatively impacted by BET reductions, the province maintained BET rates at the 2020 BET rate for properties owned by the provincial government for the purpose of PILs, payment in lieu of taxes. And whereas there are 3 properties owned by the federal government within the township of Lees and the Thousand Islands that fall within the rate class. And whereas the federal government has not indicated whether it tends to utilize the reduced BET rate of 0.0088 or the legislated rate of 0.0125 when it remits to the 2021 PIL. And whereas the anticipated loss in revenue for the township in respect for these 3 federally owned properties, if reduced BET was used, is nominal, the revenue loss to municipalities across Ontario has been estimated at 20 million in 2021 by OMTRA if the federal government does not pay the legislated BET rate. Now, therefore, be it resolved, therefore, the Committee of the Whole recommends that the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands respectfully requests the federal government and all federal crown corporations recognize that the province's 2021 BET rate reduced rates are intended to support Ontario business during the burden of COVID-19, and they are not intended to reduce the federal government's fair share for consumption of local services. And further, that the federal government and all crown corporations commit to paying the legislated BET rate of 0.0125 for 2021. And further, that this resolution be forwarded to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, MP Barrett, MPP Clark, and Amo. Discussion on the motion. Go ahead, Councillor Foti.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to ask the obvious question. What are the 3 lands in our township that fall under this jurisdiction?
Probably would be, I would assume the border would be one of them. Go ahead, Treasurer.
To your worship, I think one's the post office, and I honestly don't remember what they all are off the top of my head.
So could be the 3 post offices. Wait, do we have 3? Well, I don't think we have 3. We don't have one in Lyndhurst anymore.
The post.
Oh, we do? Go ahead.
Your worship, the post office in Sealy's Bay is the
Within,
tenant.
yeah.
So I don't
No,
know
I
exactly what all that means.
I would think that the Lansdowne post office, I would think that the border.
I can provide the list to council after the meeting if you like.
Okay. And while I have you at the stand, you're standing at the podium. Thank you. It's late. Was the calculation done as to what this would mean financially for the actual amount if it were received or if it was reduced for our municipality? What was the dollar figure or the estimation? Do you remember?
Yes, it was about $500. So it's the reason though that we're doing this really honestly is because all the lower tier treasurers, we've all basically tried to take a stand together because, and I know in previous municipalities I've worked where there are more properties like this, it can be a significant impact to your tax revenue. So I'm trying to show support for the other lower tiers too, who do have more properties some are impacted quite heavily by this type of.
Thank you for that additional information. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? And the motion is carried. I think it is important that we show solidarity with our other lower tier municipalities who we may need their support in the future too. So thank you for that. Next, any notices of motion? Notices of motion? Any notices of motion? I've got nothing at this point. So the mayor's update, county update without the answer that Councillor Foti had asked for in regards to the expansion of paved shoulders. The county has approved the community safety zone in front of the Sweets Corner School. So those flashing lights will be going up, and the differing time zones, essentially when the school's in session and not on weekends, will change the speed limits. So the speed limit had been reduced, but now it's just doing it based more on a timely manner versus all day, every day, all day, all week. And also the speed reduction here in Lansdowne. So pay attention, folks. The sign's going to go up, and I'm saying that to remind myself that coming into Lansdowne, we are reducing the speed at Rapid Valley Corner, right at the in front of the police station. I believe it goes down to 50. So you want to take your time coming into town. Don't be in a hurry. Also, a few other things. This is Ontario Agricultural Week. Obviously, one of the things that was mentioned this evening in regards to economic development, agriculture is a backbone of this community, and there are a number of businesses supported by that, as well as a number of farmers who continue to maintain the fabric of this community. And for them and their hard work, we appreciate that, and all the businesses that support them. It's also Fire Prevention Week, and it's a good time to review your household emergency exit plan, and the time will change. Check your smoke alarm batteries as well if you still have a battery operated smoke alarm. It's later this month, it'll be Small Business Week. And in partnership with the town of Gananoque, Keys, and others, we are proud to host some virtual workshops, which I know have been promoted online. So take a peek at that. And if you or you know somebody who has a small business that might benefit from those virtual workshops, we highly recommend them. The St. Lawrence Parks Commission has definitely put in some effort to establish a volunteer trail committee. And I know that this is definitely welcomed. I know that there's still some frustration with residents in the change of where stop signs are located, and whether people in vehicles stop to adhere to that, or vice versa, the people on the parkway stop at those stops. There's still some challenges there, but they're working to make things better. And my hope is that as more and more people get involved in the trail strategy and volunteering their time, that the education value goes up for the people using the trail, both on the trail and the people crossing it with vehicles, so that everybody's safe, because we would hate to have anybody hurt either way. October 23rd, there's going to be a tanker shuttle test taking place throughout our township for our fire department. So if that is the case and you're out and about on the 23rd of October, please, when you see flashing lights, please pull over. It's always the case. And if our fire service is coming through, whether it's the shuttle test or otherwise, we hope that you would pull over and give them room to get to where they need to go. There are 2 food drives taking place this month. The first is in Rockport on October 9th, and the community-wide drive is also taking place on October 23rd. So if you are in the position to give of your own household food budget to assist others, please give generously. The Rockport boat ramp, my thunder, October 25th. So to be started and hopefully completed by November 26th. And again, thank you to the operations department for making that happen. I know that the people of Rockport definitely appreciate it, as well as the businesses. And we look forward to having a snazzy, nice, new, long ramp that will serve us for many years to come. Lastly, please take a moment to complete the waste management survey on our website and social media platforms. We ask that the members of council, if you have the ability to share that with your friends and neighbors. We've got quite a few responses already, which is very encouraging. I believe Director Holiday mentioned that it had been sent out to the lake associations, lane associations, the Chamber of Commerce. There's a number of places that we've already pushed it out, but the more responses we get, the more robust the data will be, that we can hopefully form our decisions going forward. And I think that is it for me. Are there any other announcements that anybody wants to put forward? Okay. Oh, well, thanks. Oh yeah, I guess it is Thanksgiving. That's a good point. Sorry. Actually, this is my favorite time of year. The fall has always been my favorite time of year. Mainly because the trees that turn here and the place that we live is beautiful any time of year, but especially in the fall. We get to give thanks, and this is my favorite holiday because it's not very commercialized. So it's a chance to come together as family and friends and your community to give thanks for what we have and share the bounty that we might have with others. And so I challenge all of you to invite somebody to your Thanksgiving table that may not have been there before, who might be celebrating on their own, or not to celebrate on their own, to celebrate with you and your family if possible. So with that, happy Thanksgiving to all of you this weekend and to your friends and family. So the motion comes forward from Councillor Maybe and seconded by Councillor Foti that the committee of the whole adjourn. All those in favor?